Welcome to the deep dive. We've got an interesting challenge on our hands today, one that really touches a fundamental part of moving to SAP S4HANA.
hmm
Listeners send over some materials focused on customer vendor integration, CVI.
Right, CVI, it's a big one.
Yeah, and this document, it looks like it tracks how things developed between maybe 2016 and 2018.
Seems about right for that period of intense focus.
And our listener, their mission, essentially, is to cut through all the complexity and really get the core ideas, especially how CVI bridges that gap, between the old way of handling customer and vendor data and this new business partner concept in S4HANA.
It's a crucial bridge to understand.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. I think the real eye-opener, the aha moment maybe,
Yeah.
is grasping why this integration is even necessary. And maybe surprisingly, the powerful things it actually lets you do.
Absolutely. There are real benefits hiding behind the technical necessity.
So to guide us through what can seem like a pretty complex topic, we've got our expert with us. Welcome.
Thanks. Happy to dive into CVI. It really does underpin a lot of what makes S4HANA tick differently.
Definitely. So let's start right there with the why. What was wrong with the old way? The limitations in older ERP systems with separate customer and vendor masters. What were the pain points?
Well, like the document points out, the traditional setup kept customer and vendor data in, completely separate boxes.
Silos, basically.
Exactly, silos. Think about it, you could have the same company, right? They buy from you, maybe you buy from them.
Customer and vendor.
Precisely. But the system treated them like two totally different things. You'd be entering the same address, maybe the same basic contact info twice.
Oh, wow. Redundant effort. Prone to errors, I bet.
For sure. And there was no easy way to just see that connection, no concept of a unified relationship. Plus, the old model, it wasn't really built for today's business needs. Multiple addresses, forget it, usually just one main one.
Right.
Different roles a partner might play over time, or even B2C scenarios. It was pretty static, kind of rigid, no real time dependency built in either.
Okay, so it lacked that dynamic connected view we often need now. So how does the business partner in SAP S4HANA fix these issues?
So the business partner, or BP, that's the strategic answer. It's designed to be the central hub, the single point of management for, well, all your business partners.
Regardless of whether they're a customer or a vendor or maybe something else.
Exactly. Or both. And their core data, the general stuff, lives in one place. Now, CVI, customer vendor integration, that's the mechanism. It's the automated process that makes sure this central BP object stays perfectly synchronized with those, let's call them traditional customer and vendor views that some parts of the system still need.
Okay. So CVI is like the engine running in the background, keeping the old way talking to the new, more unified approach. Like a translator, maybe.
You're a coordinator.
That's a great analogy. Translator and coordinator. We're making sure the customer speak and vendor speak are both understood in this central business partner hub.
Makes sense. And what's really interesting is the knock-on effect of doing this. Using the business partner, it brings some pretty significant advantages way beyond just, tidier data.
Tell us more. What are these key benefits we get with the BP approach?
Well, first off, one BP record represents one single legal entity. That's it. Doesn't matter how many hats they wear when dealing with you.
So that company that's both a customer and supplies you with something critical.
One BP.
Okay.
Simple as that. And then, within that single BP record, you can assign multiple roles. They're a customer, fine. They're also a vendor, fine. All linked.
Right.
And the general data name, main address, maybe core communication details that's shared across all roles. But the role-specific stuff, like sales order history for the customer role or purchasing terms for the vendor role, that's kept separate, tied to the specific role.
That sounds much more logical. It must really streamline data management, right? And give you a clearer picture of the whole relationship.
Absolutely. You minimize that duplicate data entry, which, saves time, reduces errors, massive benefit. And it makes consolidating data for reporting or analysis so much easier. Plus, the BP model itself is way more flexible.
How so?
You've got different categories as an organization, a person, maybe a group, and you can define relationships between BPs, like this person is the contact person for that organization.
Oh, nice. Real-world relationships mapped in the system.
Exactly. And importantly, it properly supports things we take for granted now, like multiple addresses, shipping, billing, headquarters, whatever. And it handles time dependency.
Time dependency. What does that cover?
Things like, well, an address is only valid for a certain period, or bank details change, or even the roles they hold might have start and end dates. It brings that temporal aspect in. And overall, it provides a consistent, harmonized data architecture across the different S/4HANA applications.
Okay, so it's more efficient, definitely more flexible, gives you that holistic view. Got it. Now, let's get into the guts of CVI. How does it actually do the synchronization? What's the process?
So the document gets into this. CVI relies on an automated synchronization process, and the main tool you use to manage it is called the Master Data Synchronization Cockpit.
Master Data Synchronization Cockpit.
Okay.
Sounds important.
It is. Think of it as your central control panel for CVI. When you set it up, the system basically creates a link, an assignment, between every existing customer record and a newly created BP record. Same for vendors.
So it pairs them up.
Exactly. And this link, it's maintained in both directions. So if you change something in the BP, CVI can push that change to the corresponding customer or vendor record, and vice versa, depending on how you configure it.
Ah, so it's not just a one-time thing like a data migration. It's an ongoing dynamic connection.
Precisely. It has to be for the system to function correctly post-conversion. The document even shows this kind of complex interface where the BP data coexists with the specific customer, like KNA1 table data, and vendor LFA1 table data information. There's some managed redundancy there, like the general data in BO2000 for the BP and also in KNA1 LFA1.
Okay, so that allows bridging the gap.
Right. And SAP provides guided procedures, reports essentially, to help you through that initial conversion of existing customer vendor data into the BP structure. And here's a really crucial point. In an S/4HANA system where CVI is active, anytime you create a new customer or a new vendor, say, through the traditional transactions, if they're still enabled temporarily, or through other means, a corresponding business partner record is always created automatically.
Always.
Okay.
That's fundamental. It enforces that BP-centric model.
It has to.
Right. So it's this continuous alignment process. Now, thinking about someone who's, facing this transition, what are the absolute must-knows? How do you actually navigate this move?
Well, that master data synchronization cockpit, you might hear people call it by its transaction code, MDS-led HOC pieces. That's going to become a very familiar tool.
Right. MDS-led data cockpit.
It's critical. You use it to prepare the data load, actually run it, and then monitor how it went. The document also really highlights the importance of something called the post-processing office, or PPO.
PPO. Okay, what does that do?
Think of it as an error handling mechanism. When the synchronization runs, if it hits a problem, maybe missing configuration, maybe bad data in a record, it doesn't just fail silently or stop everything. It flags the error and creates an entry in the PPO.
Ah, like an inbox for sync errors. Makes sense. Because errors are pretty much inevitable in big data migrations, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. You'd be lucky to have none.
Can you give an example from the document? How does PPO help fix things?
Sure. The document mentions a couple of typical ones. You might get a customizing error, like maybe the form of address setting isn't maintained correctly for organizations in your system setup.
Okay, a configuration issue.
Right. Or it could be a master data issue, like you mentioned, maybe a customer record has an email address that's just not valid, bad format or something.
Right.
The PPO lists these errors. You can see what went wrong, often jump directly to the problematic data or the relevant configuration screen, fix it, and then this is key, re-trigger the synchronization just for those specific failed items.
Okay, so you don't have to rerun the whole batch.
Yeah.
Much more efficient.
Exactly. And the document also stresses you need to activate the creation of these post-processing orders for both synchronization directions, BP to customer vendor and customer vendor to BP. This ensures you catch issues not just during the initial load, but also during ongoing data maintenance afterwards.
So PPO is crucial for the initial cleanup and for maintaining data quality long-term. Good tip. What about the overall timing? When should you tackle CVI in an S/4HANA project?
The advice in the document is pretty strong on this. Run the initial BP-CVI synchronization well before the actual technical cutover to S/4HANA.
Not during the go-live weekend.
Definitely not. The recommendation is weeks, maybe even months beforehand.
Why so early?
Because you will find issues, data problems, configuration gaps. You want time to identify them, analyze them, fix them, and rerun the sync checks without the immense pressure of a go-live deadline looming. Trying to sort out CVI issues during cutover is a recipe for delays and stress.
That makes a lot of sense. Get the data house in order early. So what other specific challenges might pop up during CVI, and how do you tackle them?
Number ranges are almost always a hot topic. You've got existing customer numbers, existing vendor numbers, now you need business partner numbers. How do they align?
Do they need to be the same? Can they overlap?
That's the challenge. Ideally, maybe you want the BP number to be the same as the customer or vendor number if an entity is only one or the other. But what if they're both? What if your customer and vendor number ranges already overlap? You need a clear strategy.
And I guess HR data complicates it too. Employees becoming BPs.
Exactly. If you're converting HCM employees to business partners, which is a separate process but often happens around the same time, their number ranges also come into play. The document specifically warns about potential conflicts if you try to force the same number across all these different objects, especially with overlapping source ranges.
Okay, overlapping ranges sound like a potential nightmare. How do you manage that?
Well, the document gives an example strategy. During the initial synchronization phase, you might configure the main business partner number range to be external.
External meaning you provide the number.
Right. This allows the synchronization process to attempt to assign the existing customer or vendor number as the BP number. Then, after go live, once things are stable, you could potentially switch the BP number range back to internal for newly created BPs if that's your long-term plan. It requires careful planning.
A temporary workaround almost.
Kind of. Beyond numbering, the biggest challenges usually lie in the quality and consistency of your existing master data.
The classic data cleansing headache.
Yep. Things the document lists include missing tax numbers or categories, industries not being classified correctly, address formats being inconsistent or invalid, incorrect bank details, missing account holder names, weird postal code formats, VAT number inconsistencies. The list goes on.
Wow. Lots of potential pitfalls.
Invalid credit card numbers, contact person visiting hours that don't make sense, missing web addresses, undefined country codes for BPs, even fields being too long for the target BP field. All potential sync stoppers.
So a really thorough data cleansing and validation effort before you even start the main CVI sync is absolutely critical then.
Absolutely non-negotiable, really. And SAP provides tools to help find these issues beforehand. The document mentions a few check reports. The Master Data Consistency Check, CVI period to HK, a CVI Customizing Check Report, BP CVI MGCHK, and a CVI Completeness Check, CVI Conti MPLCHK. Running these early is key.
Proactive checks. Good.
Another recommendation is to archive customer and vendor records that are marked for deletion or are no longer used before the main conversion. Clean out the clutter first.
Makes sense. Simplify the data set.
Also, don't forget the basics you need to make sure the core business functions for CVI are activated in your system. The document names KPSOA and KSupplier SOA.
Technical prerequisites.
Right. And one more thing, if you have custom fields, Z fields, added to your customer or vendor master data over the years, you'll need a plan to integrate those into the business partner structure, usually involving technical development using things called business add-ins or BADIs.
Okay, so custom enhancements need specific attention. It's a really comprehensive effort, then strategy, data prep, configuration, using the tools. Let's circle back to number ranges and groupings for a sec. You said they're critical, and the document seems to emphasize them.
It does, and rightly so. They're fundamental. It's how the system identifies and links everything together. The core principle when defining your BP number ranges should really start with looking at your existing customer and vendor ranges.
Are they separate? Do they overlap?
Exactly. If they're nicely disjointed and no overlaps, your life is simpler. Ideally, you might mirror that structure in the BP setup. But if they do overlap, which is common, you need that careful strategy we talked about. Ensure uniqueness for the BP, but maybe try to reuse existing numbers where it makes sense and is possible.
And that's where the temporary external setting might come in during the sync.
Precisely. The document walks through a quite detailed example of managing overlapping internal number ranges during sync and post-go live, highlighting how using external ranges for BP temporarily can really help navigate that initial data load complexity.
So it's like temporarily putting on different labels to avoid a mix-up during the move.
That's a good way to put it. Now, you also still need to define the number ranges for your traditional customer and vendor master records themselves and assign those ranges to your account groups.
Account groups still matter then.
Oh, yes. They still control field status and other things for the customer vendor specific views, even if maintenance happens via the BP. And then, critically, you define the number ranges and groupings specifically for the business partner.
Okay, separate definitions for BP.
Right. And the document makes a specific point. If you plan to take over existing customer numbers as BP numbers, using that external assignment trick, you must define at least one internal and one external standard grouping for the business partner.
Got it. An internal one for new BPs later, maybe, and an external one for the migration.
Exactly. And don't forget, you might also need number ranges for BP relationships, like that contact person for link.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
More number.
And then there's the mapping. You need to explicitly link the BP roles. The standard ones are things like FLCU01 for customer financial data, FLCU01 for sales data, FLVN00 for vendor general financial, FLVN01 for purchasing.
Okay.
You map those roles to your existing customer and vendor account groups. This tells the system how a BP in a certain role relates to the configuration you already have for customers and vendors.
That mapping sounds crucial for consistency.
It is. And one last point here from the document. Think about field modifications.
Yeah.
You know, how you might have made certain fields mandatory, optional, or hidden in the old customer-vendor transaction.
Yeah, the field status settings.
Right. You need to make sure those settings are appropriately reflected when you access the data through the BP transaction. The document points to specific SAP notes that give guidance on how to achieve this alignment.
Wow. It really is a detailed configuration exercise, getting all those numbers and mappings right. Okay, let's shift to the actual synchronization itself. Using that cockpit, MDS left or DSKKPI, how does that work in practice?
So, the cockpit, MDS load cockpit, that's your command center for the data transfer. You've got various parameters you can tweak.
Like what?
Things like block size, how many records get processed together, and settings for background processing queues, which can be important for performance, especially with large volumes. You might need to play with those based on your system's capacity.
Okay, performance tuning.
Then you define your selection criteria. Which customers or vendors do you want to synchronize in this run? You can select by account group, number range, specific IDs. The document even mentions you can upload a list from an Excel file if you need to process a very specific subset.
Ah, flexible selection. Good.
The advice is usually to start with smaller batches, especially for initial tests. Makes it easier to analyze any errors that pop up.
Makes sense. Start small, find problems, fix, then scale up.
Exactly. Once you've set your parameters and selection, you execute the synchronization run. And then you use the monitor tab within the cockpit to track its progress. You can see logs, check the status, did it finish okay, were there errors? You can filter by who ran it, when it ran, etc.
So it gives you that central control and visibility over the whole process. What are the absolute must-haves, the prerequisites for a successful sync run?
Well, number one is getting all that CVI and business partner customizing right before you start. All those number ranges, groupings, role mappings we just talked about. If that's not correct, the sync will likely fail spectacularly.
Garbage in, garbage out, essentially.
Pretty much. If you have a connected CRM system, its integration points need to be considered too, as the document mentions. There's also an interesting point about having an option sometimes to temporarily suppress certain checks, particularly address checks for specific account groups like maybe your one-time customers, CPD accounts.
To avoid getting stuck on minor issues for less critical data.
Potentially, yes. It can sometimes help streamline the initial load, but needs careful consideration. And the cockpit has a test run feature.
Test run sounds useful.
It can be, but the document includes a strong caution here. Don't run a test run on huge volumes of data, especially not in your production system or a recent copy. Why? Because even in test mode, it might still consume numbers from your internal number ranges without actually saving the data. You could accidentally exhaust your number ranges.
Oh, wow. That's a serious warning. Use test run carefully and on small samples.
Definitely. The document actually includes a pretty detailed example sequence of running MDS load cockpit in a complex scenario involving customers, vendors, and their contact persons, and even factoring in CRM integration. It shows the kind of step-by-step approach you might need, maybe running vendors first, then customers, then contact persons, handling dependencies.
That kind of concrete example must be incredibly helpful for planning. Okay, let's assume the initial big sync is done. You've moved the bulk data. What happens next? What are the critical post-conversion activities?
Right, you're live on S/4HANA, CVI is active. One of the very first things, according to the document, is to make sure you activate the creation of those post-processing orders, PPO, specifically for the direction from business partner to customer vendor.
We activated the other direction for the initial load, right?
Exactly. Now you need this direction active for ongoing maintenance. Why? Because, and the document really emphasizes this, after the switch to S/4HANA with CVI, all maintenance of customer and vendor data should happen only through the business partner transaction BP.
So the old transactions like XD01 and XK01 are essentially replaced by BP.
They are redirected or should ideally not be used directly for maintenance. BP becomes the single point of entry. So you need changes made in BP to reliably flow down to the underlying customer vendor tables. That's why activating PPO and the synchronization options for BP to customer and BP to vendor is vital.
Okay, ensuring ongoing consistency. What else?
You'll also need to configure something called the BP role category for that BP to customer vendor direction. This helps control how new customer or vendor records get created or updated based on changes in the BP. Number assignment, again, remains a consideration. How are new numbers generated post-conversion? And remember those field status settings we talked about. Aligning the old customer vendor field statuses with the BP transaction settings is crucial for user experience and data consistency. The document points to SAP Notes for this.
Right, making sure the screens look and behave consistently.
Yes. Plus, maintaining the mapping of industry codes between BP and customer vendor is important for data flowing that way. And just doing some general checks of all your CVI and BP customizing settings to ensure everything is still aligned and consistent after the conversion dust settles.
So it's not quite set and forget it after the main migration. There's still crucial configuration for smooth sailing afterwards.
Definitely ongoing tuning and checks are needed.
Now, CVI is obviously core to S/4HANA, but how does it ripple outwards? How might it impact other systems connected to your SAP environment?
That's a really important angle the document covers. For existing interfaces like CIF, which connects to supply chain planning systems, or middleware used for CRM integration, the general message is they should continue to function. But
There's always a but.
well, the recommendation is that if you have any external application that needs to create or update business partner data in S/4HANA, you should ideally use the standard methods, either IDocs or the newer BP SOAP service. There's a specific SAP note mentioned for guidance on this.
So prefer the standard integration methods for incoming BP data.
Yes. Now, what about the classic IDocs, like DEBAs for customers and CREMAs for vendors? The document says they're still available in S/4HANA.
Oh, okay. So existing interfaces using them might still work.
They might, but the internal processing behind them has been redesigned. When a DEBMAS or CREMAS IDoc comes into S/4HANA, the system now triggers the CVI synchronization to create or update the business partner as well. However, there are limitations noted. For example, you can't use these IDocs to merge an existing standalone customer and an existing standalone vendor into a single BP. Ah, okay. Some functional restrictions.
Right. And there's a technical point about an switch that might need activation if you're dealing with IDocs that only contain IBAN information for bank details, not the legacy bank account number.
Okay, technical detail to watch out for. What else? Beyond interfaces.
The whole topic of HCM employee data. As we touched on, converting employees to business partners isn't technically part of the customer vendor CVI process itself.
It's separate.
It's a separate but equally critical step. It typically happens after the main S/4HANA technical conversion, and you use a specific report mentioned as SHCMR HYNC BUPA from Mempool to perform this synchronization.
So CVI first, usually, then HCM to BP sync.
That's the common sequence. The document also mentions a newer employee business partner model introduced in S/4HANA 2020, and importantly, it advises against trying to reuse these employee BPs as vendor BPs, even if the employee is also a vendor.
Why not? It seems efficient.
Because the underlying data models and restrictions might be different, leading to potential issues down the line. Better to keep them separate. Okay, good advice. What about other areas? Credit management.
Yes, that changes too. S/4HANA moves from the old FIARCR credit management to the newer SAP credit management, which is part of financial supply chain management, FINFSCMCR. This transition absolutely involves BP-related steps and configuration.
So CVI interacts with the credit management transition.
Definitely. And for organizations with SAP CRM systems connected, the document stresses careful handling during all phases of the CVI project before, during, and after sync. You need consistency checks on mapping tables between CRM and S4, and there are specific SAP notes mentioned for guidance relevant to each phase. It even points towards an open SAP course for more details on that CRM integration piece.
The CRM integration needs special focus throughout the CVI journey.
Absolutely. Then there are industry solutions. ISU for utilities and ISR for retail get specific mentions with their own SAP notes and considerations. A key point for ISU is that you cannot use the standard MDS load cockpit for the customer vendor to BP conversion. There are industry-specific tools.
Crucial difference for utilities.
Yes. And if you're using SAP Master Data Governance, MDG, especially embedded within S/4HANA, you need to think about how CVI interacts with MDG workflows and configurations, maybe related to events like CRMOU or any custom Z function modules you might have built.
MDG adds another layer of complexity.
It does. Finally, for integration with SAP Cloud for customer C4C, there's a specific note reference that outlines the supported scenarios.
Phew. That's a lot of touch points. It really underscores that CVI isn't just an island. It affects the whole connected landscape.
Precisely. You have to look at the bigger picture.
Okay, so bringing it all together for the learner who sent us this material. Based on our deep dive, what are the absolute key takeaways, the actionable insights?
I think the most crucial thing to grasp is that CVI isn't just a technical hurdle you have to jump over. It's really a strategic shift. It's moving towards this much more unified, flexible, master data model with the business partner right at the core.
It's a foundational change.
It is, and because of that, thorough preparation is just paramount. You can't skimp on it, especially around cleaning your existing data, getting all the system configuration settings right, and really thinking through that number range strategy.
Prep.
Absolutely. Then know your tools. That master data synchronization cockpit, MDS load HTTP PI, and the post-processing office, PPO, these are your essential companions for actually managing and monitoring the conversion process. You need to understand how they work.
Get comfortable with the cockpit and PPO.
Right. And third, remember, it's not just about your core S4 system. You absolutely have to recognize and plan for the impact on all those surrounding systems and interfaces, CRM, BW, custom interfaces, everything to make sure the whole ecosystem works together harmoniously after the change.
Holistic view is key.
Definitely. And finally, I'd really encourage exploring those specific SAP notes and the detailed documentation that the source material refers to. They contain so much valuable, specific information for tackling the particular challenges you'll face in your own implementation.
Great summary. So we've explored the why, the what, the how, the potential pitfalls, and the broader impact of CVI. Hopefully this has really shed light on the logic behind the business partner concept and the real advantages this integration brings.
Hope so. It's complex but logical when you break it down.
Yeah, and we know this was a really detailed exploration, but that was the goal, right? To give you, our listener who asked, a solid, thorough understanding of CVI, and quickly.
It's a topic that warrants the detail.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought to chew on. Considering this fundamental shift, moving to this central business partner model, changing how you manage data and processes in S/4HANA, what new possibilities does that actually unlock? Thinking specifically about, say, optimizing your supply chain interactions now that you have a clearer view of vendor relationships, or maybe gaining much deeper customer insights through better data analytics now that everything's unified. It really makes you think beyond the migration itself, doesn't it?
It certainly should. The potential benefits go far beyond just solving the old system's limitations.
Exactly. Well, if you have follow-up questions or there's another specific bit of CVI or S/4HANA you'd like us to tackle in a future deep dive, please do let us know. Thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.